and joy today with Paul and Alsu's families. We're also grateful to President Biden, Secretary Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Chancellor Schultz, and every U.S. or foreign government official who helped get Evan released. Our family has felt so much love and support from Evan's fellow journalists, his wonderful friends, and many, many people around the world. It made a difference to Evan and to us, and we especially thank Evan's colleagues at Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. They've taken care of Evan and our entire family since the beginning, and we are forever grateful, end quote. A moment of celebration for the families who will soon have their loved ones back home, but one that's bittersweet. As we learned, Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny was supposed to have been involved in this swap, but he died in an Arctic penal colony back in February. Navalny's widow spoke with the vice president earlier today, and she tweeted out this statement, quote, "Every released political prisoner is a huge victory and joy. No one should be held hostage by Putin, tortured, or die in Putin's prison. Freedom to all political prisoners," end quote. And that's where we start this hour with the White House National Security Communications Advisor, John Kirby. Admiral, good to see you. Thank you for being with us today. This is, first of all, let's just start by reminding everybody this is a great day. A number of innocent people were released from unjust situation. I mean, we call them prisoners. They weren't prisoners. They were essentially hostages of the Russian government.
Yeah, wrongfully detained and held, obviously, under trumped-up charges. They were innocent of everything they were accused of and quote-unquote, tried in the Russian judicial system for it. So they absolutely innocent people were glad, of course, that they're released and they're going home.
Talk about how this came to be. Everybody we've talked to today explains that, you know, hostage or wrongfully detained negotiations are a complicated matter, even when there are just two parties involved. This involved 7 nations. This was multilateral, very delicate, had to be kept under wraps. Tell me what you can tell me about how this came to be.
This particular deal was months in the making, and because you're right, there had been movement in some ways where, for instance, we thought we were going to get Mr. Navalny in this deal. Then, of course, he dies in a Russian prison. That actually threw the discussions and the negotiations and our planning askew, because we had to now find a different path to try to get everybody home, knowing that Mr. Navalny couldn't be a part of that deal. Not an impossible path, clearly, but it certainly required extra work by the team moving in a different direction to try to put this deal together. But because it was multilateral, because it involved so many different countries and so many different individuals in the swap, both on their side and our side, it did take a little bit longer to put it all together. But it absolutely couldn't have happened without the personal involvement of the president himself. I mean, just 1 hour, 2 Sundays ago, right before he announced that he wasn't going to seek re-election, he was on the phone with the Prime Minister of Slovenia, nailing down the last bit of detail that we needed to nail down before we could actually get this deal in place. So an awful lot of effort right up until the very end.
You're a guy who knows President Biden well. That's actually completely on brand for him. This is where he thrives, where he can try and make a difference, where he can leverage his decades of experience in terms of negotiations, in terms of relations with people. He made a comment today about how alliances and allies and friends matter. And that's sort of an important thing for Americans to be considering right now in a world where it can go two ways, right? We can either strengthen our alliances or we can weaken them.
Yeah, you know, there's an old saying, you know, all politics is local. The president believes that all foreign policy is personal. And if you don't invest as a leader in the foreign policy agenda that you're advancing around the world, and that means investing in these relationships, these alliances and partnerships, then you're not going to get anywhere. And I think Jake Sullivan said it really well today at the podium. There's not too many other leaders in the world that could have put this complex a deal together over the course of these many months and get this kind of result than somebody with the vast experience and the relationships of Joe Biden.
Let's talk about what's happening in the next few hours, because as emotional as Jake Sullivan was in that news conference, this is going to be an emotional night. When people see that plane land and see these people get off, whether you knew them or not, whether you've ever read Evan Gershkovich's work or not, watching people who have been in jail for hundreds, and in Paul Whelan's case, over 2,000 days, is something.
Yeah, I think the tears are not over today. They're going to come home tonight to Andrews Air Force Base, not too far away from where I'm standing right here, and the families will finally get a chance to wrap their arms around them tell them they love them, and make sure that they know that they're going to be with them for the rest of their lives. That's going to be a big moment. And I think the emotion will certainly run high, as it should. None of these individuals, as we first started talking, Ali, had any business being in a Russian prison to begin with.
Right.
And so to know that they're free and to know that they're going to get the care that they need and the love and support of their family, I think is going to make all the difference in the world. It's going to be a very impactful evening.
Yeah, I mean, I had trouble when I saw the news this morning keeping it together. I'm not going to be able to tonight. Let's talk about this idea that none of them had any business being in prison in the first place, except it's kind of what Russia does, kind of what Iran does, kind of what China does in some instances. North Korea does it. There have been conversations around how do you do something like this, achieve this kind of success, and at the same time not incentivize states to engage in this taking of people and convicting them and putting them in jail or holding them?
Yeah, look, I think it's an open question that precept is actually true, that negotiating a deal like this just encourages more hostage-taking. The truth is, we haven't seen data that actually confirms that that's the case. I mean, even when you're not negotiating deals, bad actors like Russia, bad actors like Iran are still taking hostages. It is, as you said, what they do, and whether they're seeking a specific point of leverage or not, which is why the State Department now has a designation for countries around the world telling you what the detention risk would be if you go. And so we really encourage Americans to take a look at that before you decide to travel. And absolutely don't go to Russia right now. Yeah,
there's a D when you go to some states. It'll have a little D on the State Department website to say there's a high risk of detention. Admiral, let me ask you about what's going on in the Middle East at the moment. There is concern, obviously, of a retaliation from Iran after the assassination of Haniya, in the political head of Hamas. What are you preparing for? What do Americans need to think about in terms of what can happen in the coming days?
Well, look, when you hear the supreme leader of Iran talk about avenging and taking action, we can't just look the other way. We got to take those comments and that rhetoric seriously. Iran has already proven that they're capable and willing of conducting a major attack on Israel. We saw that in April. Certainly, they've proven capable of supporting groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis in the region. So we have to take it seriously, and we are. I won't talk about the details of what that looks like, but we will, and we will maintain the capability that we need to defend our national security interests in the region against Iran's behavior.
At the moment, is there any change in our position in terms of what we're preparing for in the Middle East that you can tell me about?
I would just tell you that throughout the Middle East, we are constantly looking at force protection of our troops, our facilities, our allies and our partners, having conversations with them and adjusting as necessary. And that absolutely happens even today. What that looks like, of course, we're not going to talk about that publicly, but we are taking all necessary precautions and making sure that we have the capabilities that we need to defend ourselves and to defend our allies and partners in the region should Iran decide to do something.
Admiral, good to see you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby. All right, let's bring in former U.S. Ambassador to Russia and MSNBC International Affairs Analyst Michael McFaul and Moscow Bureau Chief for the Wall Street Journal, Ann Simmons. Welcome to both of you. Ann, it is great to see you again under these circumstances. You know, I always worry that we were never going to have this conversation that we're having today. First of all, talk to me about the release of your colleague, Evan, and what you're thinking and feeling right now.
Well, Ali, this is truly a momentous day for Evan, his family, and for his family at the Wall Street Journal. We have waited 16 long and grueling months for this day to come. Evan did not deserve to be in a Russian prison. He remained resilient. He remained, he kept his head high. And basically, the Wall Street Journal went out of its way, really above and beyond, to ensure Evan's story remained front and center and to ensure that this day definitely did come.
Ambassador McFaul, I want to, we've got so many specific things to talk about, but I want to ask you again your thoughts about this, because for so many people, they are not just intellectually and politically invested in this, but emotionally and personally invested, and I know you're one of them.
Well, I am. I can talk as a former diplomat and compare it to other things. But for me personally, 3 of my Russian friends are now free. Volodya Karamurza, Ilya Yashin, Oleg Orlov. These are people I've known for decades. They are some of the bravest people I know. They went back as Volodya did. As you know, you talked to him. I remember you talked to him frequently.
Yep.
And when he made that decision, not all of us thought it was a great decision, but I am just elated that they're free, as I am. I don't know Evan personally, but let me tell you, I got lots of footnotes to Evan in my book, my next book, because he is a fantastic reporter. That's part of the reason why he was arrested, because Putin doesn't want fantastic reporters working in his country. And just secondly, as a former diplomat, I worked on a spy swap. This is not a spy swap, this is different, but I worked on the 2010 deal that we did with the Russians. It was extremely complex, very difficult. Negotiations inside our own government were just as hard because there were people that did not want to give up spies, did not want to give up criminals to the Russians. You add the complexity of all the countries involved here, especially this horrific killer in Germany, that they pulled this off. This is a tremendous diplomatic achievement, first and foremost for the Biden administration, but for all of their counterparts in all the other countries that were involved. I just really tap my hat to them.
And what's the mood? I asked you this at the Wall Street Journal, but really I think you speak for journalists in general right now, because it's a real thing. It used to be that you had a job like yours was one of the crowning achievements of a journalistic career. Now people, maybe they're punishing people by giving them the Moscow bureau chief job. It's a dangerous thing now in a world where governments used to protect journalists. They used to keep them away from being arrested for things like this. Tell me how you and the Journal are thinking about this.
Well, it certainly is a challenging position to be in right now, being a journalist working inside Russia, when you know that you can just be picked up. Certainly, the detention of Evan and his conviction created a chilling effect for all journalists working there. It's already challenging. The government, Mr. Putin's government, does not want you to call the war a war. Journalists who speak to Russians are often followed, and the journal and the interviewees themselves are often at risk for talking to foreign reporters. This has really changed the dynamic of reporting in Russia. It was already challenging. Now you have to worry about being surveilled. Now you have to worry about, will I be picked up for the most kind of innocuous thing? Will I be followed? Will the people I speak to be at risk? So this is a really challenging time, and it's sad because it's really important to know what's going on in Russia. There are a lot of good people in Russia. People still want to know about the personal stories of Russians, how Russians are coping on a daily basis. But it's almost impossible now to give that true picture because of the risks involved.
This is an interesting point, Anne, that you make, and Ambassador, this is a point that Vladimir Kara-Murza would often make to me. Don't talk about Russians, talk about the Russian administration, the Russian government, the Putin administration, because there are lots of Russians. There are 150 million of them, and most of them are people like everybody else you've ever met in the world. They would just like prosperity and health and safety and a bright future. They're not the problem. Their government's the problem.
Well, that's true, but not all Russians are innocent. I want to also say that, thinking of my Ukrainian colleagues, the Russians that chose to stay and provide billions of dollars in taxes and build weapons, they're helping, and that is a choice one has to make, but it's a difficult choice. Volodya and other journalists, let's remember all the journalists, including Alsu Kurmashev,